Hello there folks, the Mediocre Painter here, and I've been painting miniatures for some 32 odd years, and I'm doing YouTube videos to try and help the beginner get into the wargaming hobby, particularly around painting and things like that, but also reviews and things, because I've made the mistakes so you don't have to. So this video is part of a series of videos I've been doing to sort of explain the painting process, and this is video going to be about washes. And this is part of that 4-step process that we've been talking about, and if you're interested in seeing the prior videos, they're going to be somewhere up here somewhere. And this is basically the 3rd step, 1st step being prime, 2nd step being bowscout, 3rd step being washes, and the 4th step basically the details. So we're going to be focusing on the wash phase today. So first things first about washes. Washes aren't quite like paints in terms of the way that they go on the model. Sometimes it's difficult to judge exactly what kind of effect you're going to get. And it's only really by a little bit of practice or basically stealing other people's ideas and such, and to figure out exactly, what's going to go where and how it's really going to go and work. So a lot of the popular washes like Agrax Earthshade are kind of a bit of a catch-all, and Sepia is like, well, I'm not really sure what to use here, so you end up using one of those two because they always give you pretty decent results, to be perfectly honest. So if you've been following these series of videos, you'll know that we're basically, or rather I'm basically, painting a series of orcs, and I've got my orc nicely base coated here, ready for the wash phase, and I've inspected him, just checked that I've all got the base coat in all the right places. So in terms of the wash phase, what you need to think on is, okay, well, which washes I'm going to use. Now, we're beginners here, so we're going to use an overall wash. We're not going to be like shading a given area and then, backing it off in other areas so you get a nice graduation or something like that. We're not going to do that. We're basically just going to give it an overall wash. Now, you can get a little bit excited in this phase because this is the phase where you'll see the miniature really come to life and really pop out, and there is a temptation to basically splash that wash all over there and just go, hey, this is great. You do need to be subtle and careful here. So, rule of thumb here is when you're doing your washes, do make sure that you 50-50 them with water. Another important thing as well, and I keep on going on about this, is clean water at that, and change the water between the different coloured washes that you do. So remember, we're batch painting our miniatures here, so we've got our 10 orcs all base coated, so we're going to basically do the same process but with washes. We're going to do the same wash across the board along all the orcs, and then let that wash dry, and then do the next wash, and so on. You might be lucky enough to be sneaky and get away with doing multiple washes when one is drying and things like that because they're not in the same place, but generally speaking it's best to let washes dry before you move on, otherwise you get kind of mixing problems and things like that, and they're really difficult to get around without actually kind of repainting that section and things like that, and it can be a really horrible mess. So similar to the painting phase, you want to be starting from the light wash up. So in this particular case on the orc, we've got the skull motif on his belt, and in this orc over here we've got the skull motif on the head. I only painted the head on this one, but I'm just trying to show you why you want to go light to dark. The reason why you want to go light to dark is if you do make a mistake on the light, you'll overwrite it with the dark that surrounds it. That's the fundamental reason, and it's the same goes with the paint. Now, what's the difference, between washes and inks and shades and all this kind of stuff? There's lots of different things out there now. So basically, Games Workshop relabeled their inks, which is what they used to sell back in my time in the 80s, as shades, and effectively to call them something in terms of what they actually do, because what they do is they shade the model, so it's actually probably a decent name. A wash, however, is slightly different to an ink. So an ink basically will go into the nice crevices, make it pop, etc., but will also colorize what you put it over. It will actually color the area. A wash doesn't do that quite so much. A wash basically goes into those little nicks and crevices really nicely and sort of settles there, but doesn't so much colour the other areas. Different washes working slightly different ways. Some of them do a little bit, but generally speaking, that's how they are supposed to work. Essentially, a wash, though, is a thinned down shade or ink, really, at the end of the day. Now, there's some videos out there on YouTube and things like that about, you're creating your own washes and stuff, and I've actually had a reasonable amount of success myself in using pen inks to do certain kinds of washes. But do remember, if you do go down that route, they are very, very bold, they're very, very thick, good for bigger models, perhaps not so good for smaller models in my experience. You can actually make your own as well from paints. My experience with doing that is they can be a bit muddy and don't really work exactly how you want to, and also don't always behave consistently. But you can get away with it with a bit of practice and a bit of time. But since we're beginners, and like I say, I've made plenty of mistakes with using paints as washes in my time. I recommend you don't do that at this moment in time, because like I say, I've made the mistakes, so you don't have to. So what inks you should buy, I talked about that in my videos before. So in this particular case, I've got the skull motif to do, and I'm going to do that in a flesh wash. And this is an old flesh wash from Games Workshop, which isn't quite like the more current ones. More current flesh washes are a little bit ruddier and a bit red. This one is a bit more old school, and it's sort of, if you use it to do a flesh colour, you kind of get like a surly, sort of swarthy pirate sort of kind of colour. And I like it, and it really works well on bone and flesh to go in the recesses and not be too dark. So rule of thumb when you're doing your washes as well, because you're not really sure exactly how things are going to work out and behave, is go 50-50 with your washes. So basically, take your wash. I usually put it on a dry palette, though you can put it on a wet palette. Problem with putting it on a wet palette, I find, is it's then difficult to judge how much you've thinned it, whereas on a dry palette it's a little bit easier. And I add a little bit of water to that, roughly the same amount. I mix it all up and get it nice and consistent. Make sure I haven't got too much on the old brush. Now I'm using a 000 here to do this. When you actually come to actually apply it on the Mini, you want to make sure that when you contact that brush to the miniature, it's always hitting a wet area. So if you've already done a part of the wash and you're going back to load up again, make sure you're hitting a wet area again and moving it around. That way you don't get lines on the Mini where you're moving it around. And also always do the brush strokes in the same direction when you're doing this stuff. And if you're doing like a shade where you want a graduation, that's even more and more important, because there might actually be areas where you don't put the wash on at all. So here's my orc, and I'm just basically going to brush on in the same direction with my ink around where the skull is, making sure that I'm always in contact with a wet area when I'm doing it. And there we go, I've pretty much done that skull motif. Missed a little bit there. There we go. I hope you can see that. So I'm going to let that dry. Now the thing is, I'm looking at that myself and I'm not sure whether that's actually a deep enough wash or not. I might need to darken it up a bit, but that's fine. I can come back and redo it with a darker mix later on. But you never really can tell until you put it on exactly how it's going to look and work. And it's always better to err on the side of caution, because if you go too dark to begin with, very difficult to reel it back. So if you start light, you can always go darker. So that's one of the reasons why you want to do that. The other thing as well about washes is, if you're in a hard water area, then you can get a milkiness occur when you mix it with the water, and you get like a muddiness to the wash when it dries. It almost looks like you've thinned down paint and done it. I've had it happen to myself on a number of occasions in hard water areas. And actually, where I live right now is actually hard water. So the way around that is buy yourself a bottle of mineral water and use that. And this is actually mineral water I'm using here to try and avoid that situation, so that it's basically nice and clean when it actually goes on. So that's basically how you apply that. And I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll come back and I'll do the next highest wash up, which in the case of the Ux is going to be the green for the flesh. I'll just do that on this guy here to give you the idea. Now, the thing about washes is you need to be careful where you're applying them, just in the same way that you're careful where... I should really change the water here, but because I didn't have very much, I should be able to get away with it. Because the washes, you're kind of, getting it all over the place and getting it into the nooks and crannies, you can be a bit more loose naturally than you would be when you're painting. But you remember though, the wash is just like paint. It goes where the brush goes. So if you want it to get into those nooks and crannies, run it into those nooks and crannies to really bring it out. Don't just rely on it, getting there of its own accord. Do make sure that you get it to where you want it to be. Now in this case, I think I actually need a thicker wash. And, you can actually be a bit cheeky and, apply a bit direct. This is the only time you really are allowed, as far as I'm concerned, to go from pot to miniature and just, darken it up a little. Yeah, that looks much better. There we go. There. And like I say, it's just like the painting you had before. Go through, go round, do all the same wash, come back, have a quick check, see that it's all right, do the next wash up, and so on. That's it really. There's not much to the wash phase, to be honest. Just be accurate with your brush. Change your water. If you're in a hard water area, do use, a filtered water or a mineral water or something like that. And also, key thing is, let it dry. That's a really common mistake with washes when you first begin, is you get too excited at the way that they're working and you don't let them dry. And that's really important. You really do need to let them dry. Also, as you're using your inks, the same rules apply with your paints. Once you've got the stuff on the palette that you need, close your pot. You don't want to be knocking this stuff over and going everywhere, otherwise you'll be going out and buying more. So that's it for today. I hope you found it useful. The next video I'll start to talk about doing the details and highlights and the basing, and that'll be step 4, and we'll be done with our miniatures. So thank you for watching. If you like, please like it, please subscribe, please comment. Talk to you next time.